The fleet was broken. The last remnants of the Galactic Alliance forces drifted in the cold, empty void, their ships burning, their weapons failing. Wreckage floated like tombstones in the black abyss, silent reminders of the thousands who had already perished. Admiral Kalen stood on the shattered bridge of his warship, gripping the edges of the control panel, his knuckles white. The enemy fleet surrounded them on all sides, their massive dreadnoughts blocking every possible escape route. The comms were filled with the desperate cries of his remaining officers, but he had no orders left to give. They had fought, they had resisted, and now they would die. The enemy commander, a reptilian warlord named HFY, watched from the massive view screen of his flagship, a cruel smile spreading across his scaled face. "End it," he growled to his second-in-command. Humanity did not answer their distress call. No one will save them now. The order was given. The enemy fleet charged their weapons, their cannons glowing with deadly energy. It would only take a single coordinated volley to erase the last of the resistance. Kalen exhaled slowly, watching the inevitable unfold. His crew stared at him, waiting for something, anything, that could change their fate. But there was nothing left. The Galactic Alliance had always believed in unity, in diplomacy, in alliances forged through trust. But their enemies had no such beliefs. They only believed in strength, and they had proven, time and time again, that they were stronger. Then the sensors beeped, faint at first, like a whisper in the dark. The officer monitoring the long-range scanners blinked, confusion flashing across his face. "Admiral," he said hesitantly, "we're detecting something." Kalen turned sharply, a flicker of hope breaking through the crushing despair. "What?" The officer's hands trembled as he adjusted the readings. "I don't know. Something is emerging from the void." HFY's fleet detected it too. His communications officer snapped his head toward him, eyes wide. "Sir, new contacts appearing on our scanners. We don't recognize the signatures." HFY growled in irritation. "Alliance reinforcements." The officer hesitated. "No, sir. The energy readings, they don't match anything in the galactic database." Kalen's screen flickered, and the Alliance's remaining fleet received a single transmission. A message, short and precise. One word. Move. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was an order. And before anyone could react, the void itself came alive. From the darkness of space, without a single warning, ships materialized. Not through jump gates, not through traditional warp signatures. One moment, there was nothing. And the next, a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen emerge. Silent, motionless, watching. HFY's forces hesitated, their cannons still aimed at the Alliance survivors, but their focus now shifting. The warlord's eyes narrowed. Who are they? The ships bore no markings, no insignia. They were sleek, black, and seamless, like ghosts in the darkness. And they did not transmit anything further. The silence stretched, a silence thick with dread. And then, without a sound, the human fleet moved. It was unlike any battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. The first enemy warship exploded before its sensors even registered an attack. The second ship was sliced in half, its hull cleanly severed as if cut by an invisible blade. HFY barked out commands, but his fleet was already in disarray. Their systems flickered, weapons powered down inexplicably, and their shields crumbled like paper. Kalen watched in stunned disbelief as the human warships tore through the enemy with precision and cold efficiency. Their weapons did not fire traditional plasma beams or missiles. They used something else, something the galaxy had no name for. Ships simply ceased to exist in their path. One by one, the enemy fleet disintegrated, wiped out as if it had never been there. HFY, for the first time in his life, felt fear. His fleet, his mighty armada, was vanishing before his eyes, and he had no idea how or why. Desperation clawed at him as he slammed his fists on the console. Retreat. Get us out of here. But it was too late. The void had swallowed his fleet whole. In minutes, the battlefield fell silent again. The human warships loomed in the empty void, unscathed, untouched. Kalen's ship trembled as his crew struggled to process what had just happened. Then, another message came through. Threat neutralized. Continue operations. And just as mysteriously as they had arrived, the human fleet vanished. Kalen exhaled, his mind racing. The legends were true. Humanity had not abandoned the galaxy. They had simply been watching, waiting. And now, when the galaxy thought it had been left to die, they had emerged from the void. But what did it mean? What were they planning? One thing was certain. The war was far from over. It had only just begun. The battlefield was quiet now, eerily so. The wreckage of the enemy fleet drifted in the darkness. Twisted metal and shattered hulls, floating aimlessly where once there had been a mighty armada. Admiral Kalen gripped the edges of his console, his pulse still racing from the battle that had unfolded before his eyes. His fleet should have been wiped out, their forces reduced to nothing but scattered debris, and yet here they were, alive, untouched, not because of their own strength, but because of something far greater. The mysterious human warships had arrived like ghosts from the abyss, tearing through the enemy with terrifying efficiency, and then they had disappeared as quickly as they had come. Who were they? Where had they been all this time? The Alliance had believed humanity was lost, their fleets scattered, their colonies abandoned after their war with the Dominion decades ago. But this was something else entirely. These ships were not remnants of a defeated civilization. They were something far more powerful, something far more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. As Kalen stared at the void where they had vanished, he felt a deep, unsettling realization creep into his mind. Humanity had not been idle in their absence. They had not been destroyed. They had been preparing. And now, after years of silence, they had returned, not as refugees, not as desperate survivors, but as conquerors of the unknown. The enemy fleet had learned that lesson too late. Zelvar, the once feared warlord, had fled like a coward, his fleet annihilated in mere minutes. The few ships that had managed to escape would spread the story across the stars, and soon, the entire galaxy would know the truth. Humanity was back. But the real question remained. Why had they chosen this moment to reveal themselves? Were they allies? Or was this just a warning? Kalen turned to his crew, their faces filled with the same confusion and awe that he felt. No one spoke. No one dared to break the silence until the comms officer hesitantly looked up. "Sir, we have a new transmission." The Admiral's breath caught in his throat. Another message. His hands trembled slightly as he nodded. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and the entire bridge fell into stunned silence. It was not a written transmission this time. It was a face, a human face, a man, expressionless, his eyes cold and calculating, looking directly into the camera as if peering into their souls. His uniform bore no insignia, no identification of rank or allegiance, only a single emblem, the black sigil, unrecognizable to anyone in the Alliance. And then he spoke. "The galaxy is broken," the man said, his voice calm, steady, filled with an authority that sent shivers down Kalen's spine. "You were not ready to face what lurks beyond your borders. And so we watched, we waited, we let you believe we had been defeated. But now, the time for watching is over. The time for waiting is past. We have returned, and we will bring order." The transmission ended abruptly, the screen fading to black. Kalen exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He did not know what humanity had become in their years of exile, but one thing was certain. This was no longer the humanity he once knew. This was something far greater, far deadlier. And for the first time in his life, he did not know whether to feel relief or fear. The silence on the bridge was suffocating. Admiral Kalen sat frozen in his chair, staring at the darkened screen, as if willing it to flicker back to life. and provide some sort of answer, some kind of reassurance that what he had just witnessed was not the beginning of something far worse than the war they had barely survived. The crew remained motionless, every officer, every soldier, every technician gripped by an unspoken fear. It wasn't just the overwhelming power of the human warships that disturbed them. It was the message itself, the cold certainty in the man's voice. Humanity had not only returned, they had returned with a purpose. The question that loomed over all of them was what that purpose truly was. The war they had fought had been brutal, a desperate struggle against the Dominion's relentless advance. The Alliance had thrown everything they had into battle, sacrificing entire fleets just to slow the enemy's momentum, hoping that somehow, some way, reinforcements would come. But no reinforcements had arrived. No allies had stepped forward. They had been alone, hopelessly outmatched, their final stronghold barely holding together. And then, out of nowhere, the impossible had happened. From the void itself, warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen had materialized, their hulls black as the abyss, their weapons rewriting the very definition of destruction. In mere minutes, they had turned the tide of battle, decimating the Dominion's forces with an efficiency so precise it bordered on cruelty. Their technology defied all known understanding of warfare. Their weapons did not simply destroy, they erased. Energy barriers that should have been impenetrable crumbled as if they were made of paper. Shields that could withstand planet-shattering blasts flickered and died in the face of their silent wrath. The Dominion's capital ship, a vessel so massive it could blot out a sun, had been torn apart in a matter of seconds. No drawn-out engagement, no counterattacks, no mercy. Kalen had seen many battles in his lifetime, had witnessed acts of bravery and desperation, had ordered men and women to their deaths in the name of survival. But never had he seen something like this. This was not war. This was annihilation. And the humans had done it without breaking a sweat. A sudden movement snapped him from his thoughts, and he turned to see his first officer, Lieutenant Dren, his face pale but composed. "Sir," Dren's voice was low, careful. "We've detected movement." Kalen's gut twisted. Movement. Dren hesitated before nodding. "Yes, sir. The human fleet, it's still here. They haven't left." A sharp breath rippled through the bridge crew. For the last hour, they had all assumed the human warships had vanished back into whatever unknown space they had emerged from. But now, the truth settled in like a lead weight. They were still watching, observing, deciding. Kalen swallowed hard, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Have they made contact again?" "No, sir. But..." Dren's gaze flickered to the main screen, where a tactical display showed the remaining Dominion ships drifting aimlessly, their engines disabled, their weapons silent. The humans had not destroyed all of them. Some they had left intact. Kalen didn't believe in coincidence. "They're waiting," he murmured, realization dawning like a slow, creeping shadow. "They're waiting for us to make the next move." The weight of that statement pressed down on them all. For decades, humanity had been a ghost, a memory spoken only in hushed whispers. The Alliance had written them off, believing them to be lost, scattered remnants of a failed civilization. But now, it was clear that humanity had not been defeated. They had evolved. They had become something more. And now, they had returned, not to ask for help, not to seek old alliances, but to remind the galaxy of something it had long forgotten. The silence stretched on until, at last, Kalen straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening with resolve. "Send a transmission," he ordered, his voice firm. "To the human fleet." The crew hesitated. "And say what, sir?" Kalen took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Tell them, we understand. A single message, no demands, no threats, no desperate pleas for alliance or mercy. Just an acknowledgement of the truth they all now knew. The humans had not returned to be saved. They had returned to judge." The transmission was sent, and then they waited. Every second stretched into eternity as the bridge crew remained frozen in place, eyes locked on the screen, waiting for a response that might determine the fate of not just their fleet, but the entire galaxy. The human warships did not move, their silent presence more terrifying than any Dominion armada. It was as if they existed outside the normal rules of war, beyond the understanding of lesser species, watching, deciding. Kalen clenched his fists, his mind racing with possibilities. What if they had made a mistake in reaching out? What if these humans were no longer the allies they had once known, but something entirely different, something worse? The way they had fought, the sheer efficiency with which they had dismantled the Dominion forces, spoke of a power far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't just their technology, it was their intent. They had struck with the precision of executioners, not warriors. They had not simply won the battle, they had erased the opposition. And yet, despite the fear that clawed at the back of his mind, Kalen knew there was no turning back now. The humans had come, and whatever their purpose, the Alliance had to face it. A soft chime echoed through the bridge. "Sir," Dren said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're receiving a response." Every breath in the room seemed to halt as the screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was human, but not like the ones Kalen had once known. This was not the image of desperate refugees, not the remnants of a dying civilization clinging to survival. The man who stared back at them was something else entirely. His uniform was black, without insignia, his expression unreadable. But it was his eyes that struck Kalen the most, cold, analytical, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Admiral Kalen of the Alliance," the man spoke, his voice steady, controlled. "Your message has been received." The silence on the bridge was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. "Who are you?" Kalen finally managed, his throat dry. "We thought humanity was lost." The man on the screen did not smile, did not offer any sign of emotion. "Humanity was never lost," he said simply. "We simply left." The weight of those words settled over the bridge like a storm. Kalen felt his mind struggling to process them. "Left?" he echoed. "For where?" The man's gaze did not waver. "For the places you fear to tread. For the war that was yet to come. And now, we have returned." The cold certainty in his voice sent a chill down Kalen's spine. There was no arrogance in his tone, no anger or desperation, just fact. The humans had not been lost. They had been preparing. "You saved us," Kalen said carefully. "You destroyed the Dominion fleet. Why?" A pause. A moment of calculation. "Because they were in our way," the man answered, and for the first time, Kalen realized the terrifying truth. The humans had not come to rescue them. The Dominion had simply been collateral damage in whatever larger game they were playing. The battle had not been about saving the Alliance. It had been a demonstration. A warning. "Then what happens now?" Kalen asked, his heart pounding. The human finally tilted his head slightly, as if considering his words carefully. "That depends," he said. "Tell me, Admiral, does the Alliance still believe itself to be rulers of this galaxy?" The question sent a shudder through the crew. It was not a challenge. It was a test, and for the first time in his life, Kalen understood what true power looked like. The humans had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. Kalen felt the weight of the question pressing against his chest, the unspoken challenge behind those cold human eyes. This was not a simple diplomatic exchange. It was a reckoning. Every instinct in his body told him to choose his next words carefully, because the fate of the Alliance, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "The Alliance does not seek to rule," he said carefully. "We seek to protect, to unify against threats like the Dominion." The human on the screen remained motionless, his expression unreadable, but Kalen had the distinct feeling he was being measured, judged. "And yet," the man finally said, his voice even, "the Alliance allowed the Dominion to grow unchecked. It allowed the war to spread. It allowed your people to stand on the precipice of extinction, hoping that someone else would intervene. Kalen clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "We did what we could with what we had," he said. "We fought. We bled. We lost millions. We—" "You hesitated," the human interrupted, his voice sharp, cutting through the bridge like a blade. "You tried to reason with monsters. You relied on treaties, negotiations, diplomacy, while your enemy sharpened their knives. And when the time came for war, you fought with desperation, not strategy. You reacted, rather than acted. You lost because you never understood the war you were truly fighting." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one on the bridge dared to speak. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Kalen felt his pulse hammering in his ears. "And you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you understand that we don't?" The human finally leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly, and for the first time, Kalen saw something flicker in his expression. Something dangerous. "We understand that war is not won by those who fight to survive," the man said. "It is won by those who refuse to lose." The words sent a shiver down Kalen's spine. It was not just a philosophy. It was a truth that had been forged in fire, in blood, in battles fought in the void where mercy had no place. "The Dominion was powerful," Kalen said after a long pause, "and yet you destroyed them with ease." "How?" The human's gaze did not waver. "Because we became something they could never comprehend," he said simply. "Something more. Something inevitable." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, the implications settling in like a storm cloud. "Are you here to rule us?" Kalen finally asked, the question burning in his mind. The human was silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "No," he said. "Ruling you would be a waste of time." The sheer certainty in his voice was almost more terrifying than if he had declared conquest. Kalen had expected the humans to return with a vengeance, to seek justice for the past, to demand control. But they did not see the Alliance as a prize to be taken. They saw them as something lesser, something beneath them. Then why return at all? Kalen pressed. If not to conquer, then what? The human's expression darkened, and for the first time, there was a hint of something else behind those cold eyes, something that almost resembled pity. "Because something worse is coming," he said, "and you are not ready." The words landed like a thunderclap, sending a fresh wave of unease through the bridge. Kalen felt his blood run cold. Something worse. Worse than the Dominion. Worse than anything they had already faced. He tried to push down the rising fear. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely steady. The human leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable once more. "Pray you never find out," he said. And then, without another word, the screen went dark. The bridge was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Kalen stared at the blank screen, his mind racing, his heart pounding. The humans had returned. They had wiped out the Dominion like they were nothing. And yet in their eyes, the true war had not even begun. The realization sent a deep, gnawing dread into his soul. If the humans were afraid of what was coming, what chance did the rest of the galaxy have? The weight of the human's final words hung over the bridge like a specter, an unshakable presence that filled every inch of the silence. Kalen's mind churned, grasping at possibilities, but none offered comfort. If the Dominion, the most feared force in the known galaxy, had been nothing more than an inconvenience to these returning humans, then what kind of enemy could make even them wary? He turned to his officers, their faces pale with uncertainty. "Open a channel to High Command," he ordered, his voice betraying none of the turmoil within. The communications officer hesitated before responding. "Sir, High Command has already been listening." A static pulse flickered across the central display, and then an aged but firm voice filled the bridge. "Admiral Kalen," came the voice of Supreme Chancellor Valen, the leader of the Alliance. "You have done well to survive this encounter, but now we must decide our next move." Kalen felt his throat tighten. Survive. That was all they had done, been allowed to survive. He steadied himself. Chancellor, the humans are beyond anything we prepared for. If they wished, they could dismantle the Alliance in days, but they have not come as conquerors. There was a pause. Then why have they come? Valen asked. To warn us, Callan admitted. Something is coming, something even they fear. The bridge officers exchanged glances, the uneasy murmur of whispers breaking out before Callan silenced them with a look. Chancellor, I believe we must take their words seriously. And what would you suggest, Admiral? Valen's voice held a trace of skepticism. That we place our faith in those who abandoned us. Callan exhaled slowly. He knew the history. Decades ago, humanity had been part of the Alliance, standing shoulder to shoulder with them, until the Dominion had pushed too far. In a single brutal war, Earth's colonies had been devastated, its fleets crippled. And then, with no warning, humanity had vanished. They had withdrawn entirely from the galaxy, their worlds silent, their warships abandoned. No messages, no explanations, only an eerie void where they had once stood. The Alliance had believed them destroyed, consumed by their losses. But now, they had returned, stronger than anyone could have imagined, wielding technology so advanced it defied understanding. I do not know why they disappeared, Callan admitted. But I do know this. If we do not listen to them, we may not survive whatever is coming. There was a long silence before Valen finally responded, his voice heavy with thought. We will convene the High Council, he said. Gather every fleet commander, every planetary leader. If humanity has truly returned, then the galaxy must prepare. The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in an uneasy hush. Callan turned back to the blackness of space, where the last human warship had vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there at all. He clenched his fists. Whatever storm lay on the horizon, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity was ready for it. The only question was whether the rest of the galaxy would be. The High Council chamber was packed with leaders from every faction of the Alliance, their faces illuminated by the massive holographic display in the center of the room. Star charts flickered, showing sectors of the galaxy that had gone dark, entire systems lost without a trace. Fleet commanders murmured among themselves, and planetary governors whispered fearful theories. But when Admiral Callan stepped forward, the room fell silent. You've all heard the reports, he said, his voice steady. Humanity has returned, but not as we once knew them. They possess warships that make our most advanced vessels look obsolete. They wiped out an entire Dominion fleet with almost no effort, and yet they did not stay to conquer. Instead, they delivered a warning. A planetary leader scoffed from the side. A warning? From those who fled when the Dominion first attacked. Why should we listen now? Callan's gaze hardened. Because they left for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it made them stronger than any of us. He turned to the display, where a map of the galactic rim glowed red with ominous signals. Something is out there. The humans have been fighting it. And for the first time, they are not certain they can win alone. The room darkened with murmurs of disbelief. Another enemy, one strong enough to make the terrifying human war machine hesitate. The very idea sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. We have two choices, Callan continued. We ignore them, pretend we are still the dominant force in the galaxy, and wait for whatever is coming. Or, he let the silence settle. We do something no one in this room has ever considered. We stand with humanity. The weight of his words filled the air like a storm on the horizon. The Supreme Chancellor leaned forward, his aged face unreadable. And what do the humans want in return? Callan hesitated, recalling his final exchange with the human commander before their fleet had disappeared into the void. The words still echoed in his mind. We ask for nothing, Admiral. But when the time comes, stand with us, or fall alone. He took a deep breath. They didn't ask for anything. But I think they know we have no other choice. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the Chancellor nodded. Prepare the fleets, he said. If humanity is truly ready for war, then so must we be. The Allied fleets gathered at the edge of known space, their warships forming a vast armada that stretched across the void. Every species had sent their best, their strongest, their most advanced ships, but still, there was doubt. The shadow of fear loomed over them, because they all knew the truth: without humanity, they would already be dead. Admiral Kalen stood aboard the command deck of the Alliance flagship, watching the sensor feeds display an impossible sight. The human fleet had arrived, but they had not come alone. They emerged from the depths of space in formations too perfect, too disciplined, moving like a single living entity rather than separate vessels. Their warships were unlike anything seen before, black as the void, shimmering with energy fields that flickered like ghostly flames. But what sent chills through the assembled commanders was not their appearance. It was what followed behind them. A rupture in space opened like a wound in reality itself, and from it came the enemy. Towering vessels, ancient beyond comprehension, their hulls seething with energy unlike anything known in the galaxy. The void predators had arrived, and they came in numbers beyond counting. The war had begun. Silence filled the command decks of the Allied fleets as the monstrous enemy forces spread like a living tide. It was clear now why humanity had changed, why they had disappeared into the unknown for so long. They had been fighting an enemy that should not exist, an enemy that consumed entire civilizations without leaving a trace. And yet, despite the impossible odds, the humans did not hesitate. Their ships surged forward, breaking formation in ways that seemed reckless, until the first enemy vessels erupted into fire. Humanity had learned the weaknesses of these creatures, had adapted weapons unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Beams of light tore through the enemy ships, ripping them apart as if they were made of paper. The once invincible predators screamed through the void, their bodies writhing as they were annihilated. They fought like beings who had nothing left to fear, like soldiers who had already faced the end of the world and refused to bow before it. The largest enemy dreadnought broke through the lines, its weapons charging for a catastrophic blast. But before it could fire, a single human warship engaged at point-blank range. It should have been suicide, but in a single, blinding flash, the enemy vessel shattered into nothingness. The humans were not just winning. They were proving to the galaxy that they had become something else entirely. And as Admiral Kalen watched, he realized the truth. This was not just a battle. This was humanity's vengeance against the darkness that had once tried to consume them. And in that moment, he knew, this war would not end in defeat. It would end with humanity standing above the ashes as the true rulers of the stars. The battlefield was a graveyard of wreckage and burning debris, but the war was far from over. The enemy, though wounded, was relentless. Their ships twisted and reformed, their monstrous hulls regenerating as if they were alive. It was clear now, these creatures were not bound by the same physical laws as the rest of the universe. They were something beyond understanding, something that should not exist. And yet humanity had found a way to fight them. The human fleet moved like shadows through the wreckage, adapting, shifting, countering every maneuver with a precision that was almost unnatural. Admiral Kalen watched in awe as a squadron of human strike ships wove between enemy dreadnoughts, striking at weak points that should not have been known. It was as if they could see the battle before it even happened, predicting every movement, every reaction. The Allied fleets followed their lead, struggling to match the terrifying efficiency of their human counterparts. But even as they fought, the enemy continued to evolve. The largest of the void predators, a massive leviathan that dwarfed even the most powerful warships, let out a pulse of energy that rippled through space. Every Allied ship shuddered, their systems flickering, weapons failing. The void itself seemed to darken as the creature extended its influence. And then something impossible happened. The human fleet did not falter. Instead, they pushed forward, their ships glowing with a strange, eerie light. Admiral Kalen's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was happening. The humans were not just resisting the enemy's power. They were using it. Their ships absorbed the pulse, redirecting its energy into their own weapons. The Leviathan roared as lances of burning light speared through its massive form, tearing it apart from the inside. The Void Predator twisted, its unnatural body writhing as it collapsed into itself, vanishing into the darkness from which it came. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining enemy ships hesitated for the first time. They had never known fear. They had never known defeat. But now, they faced something they could not understand. An enemy that had learned to wield their own power against them. And then, in a moment that would be remembered for eternity, the human fleet advanced. They did not stop. They did not wait. They moved as one, a force of pure destruction, hunting down the remnants of the enemy with cold, unrelenting precision. The Void Predators, once thought to be invincible, began to retreat. They fled into the darkness, vanishing into the rifts from which they had emerged. The war was ending. The impossible had happened. Humanity had stood against the horrors of the void, and won. As the last enemy ship disappeared, Admiral Kalin felt something he had not known in a long time. Hope. Humanity had changed. They had become something new, something terrifying. And as the galaxy watched in stunned silence, one truth became clear. The war was not just humanity's survival. It was their ascension. As the final echoes of battle faded into the void, the galaxy stood still, watching, waiting, unsure of what came next. The remnants of the Allied fleet drifted in stunned silence, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been an unstoppable enemy. The Void Predators, beings that had consumed entire civilizations, that had feasted upon the stars themselves, were gone, driven back into the abyss from which they had come. And at the heart of it all, standing alone in the silence, was the human fleet. Their warships, battered but unbroken, floated like silent sentinels against the backdrop of the ruined battlefield. There was no celebration, no triumphant cries, only the quiet hum of power, the steady pulse of energy that had made them something more than just warriors. They had become legends. Admiral Kalin watched from his command deck, his breath slow and measured, his mind racing to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Humanity had not just won. They had evolved. The very nature of the war had changed the moment their ships had absorbed the power of the Void Predators, had turned the enemy's greatest weapon into their own. It was no longer just about survival. It was about dominance. The Allied commanders, still reeling from the battle, struggled to find the words. What? What are they now? One of them whispered over the comms, the question hanging in the emptiness of space. No one answered, because no one knew. The human fleet remained silent, their ships glowing with an unnatural energy, as if they had become something beyond the limits of mortal understanding. The fear in the voices of the other species was unmistakable. They had feared the Void Predators, but at least they had understood them. This was something else entirely. The silence was finally broken by a single transmission, a voice steady and cold. "The war is over," Admiral Kalin said, his words carrying through the stars. "But we are not finished." The meaning was clear. Humanity had learned. They had adapted. And now, they were something new, something unstoppable. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of its greatest nightmare. But in its place, a new power had risen. A power that no one, not even the most ancient civilizations, could truly understand. The humans had won the war. But now, for the first time in history, the rest of the galaxy began to wonder. Had they just traded one nightmare for another? The silence stretched across the battlefield, an uneasy stillness that gripped every surviving fleet. The Void Predators were gone, their monstrous forms now nothing more than drifting husks, remnants of a nightmare that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. And yet, the fear remained, not because of what had been defeated, but because of what had been created in the process. The human fleet, now pulsing with a dark energy unlike anything ever seen before, loomed over the ruined battlefield. Their ships, once familiar constructs of steel and fire, now shimmered with an unnatural glow, their hulls infused with the very essence of the enemy they had destroyed. They had not just survived. They had transformed. Admiral Kalen stood on the bridge of his flagship, his face impassive, his thoughts unreadable. The whispers of the Allied commanders echoed through the channels, their voices laced with uncertainty. What have they become? One asked in hushed tones, as if afraid the humans would hear him. Are they still one of us? Another voice, sharp and cold, cut through the chatter. Or have we just traded one unstoppable force for another? Kalen listened but did not answer. He had no words to offer them, no reassurances to give. Even he did not fully understand what had happened. His ships, his people, had absorbed something beyond their comprehension. A power that should not have been wielded by any species, and yet now, it flowed through them as if it had always belonged. Was this evolution, or something far more terrifying? A sudden transmission interrupted his thoughts, coming from the leader of the Ralzarin Alliance, one of the strongest factions in the galaxy, Admiral Kalen. The voice said, struggling to remain composed, "We acknowledge humanity's role in this victory, but we must know, what comes next?" The question hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. What came next? Could they simply return to their old lives, to diplomacy and treaties, knowing what they had become? Knowing that with a single command, Kalen could wipe out entire fleets, entire civilizations, just as the Void Predators had done. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. "We are not your enemies," Kalen finally replied, his voice calm, measured. "But we are not the same as we once were." The transmission ended, but the message was clear. The humans had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The battle had been won, but the war for the galaxy's future had only just begun. The silence that followed Admiral Kalen's words was heavy, stretching across the void like a suffocating blanket. The surviving fleets, their battered hulls reflecting the cold glow of distant stars, drifted in uneasy formation. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting, watching to see what humanity would do next. They had seen something that defied logic, something beyond the realm of science or warfare. The human fleet had absorbed the essence of the Void Predators, and now they were something different, something more. On the bridge of the flagship, Kalen remained motionless, staring at the holographic display of the battlefield. The remnants of the enemy were scattered like broken bones, their dark husks now little more than debris. Yet even in death, they had changed the course of history. The whispers among the Allied commanders grew louder, no longer just fear, but calculation. The galaxy had always been a place of balance, power shifting between empires, coalitions forming and dissolving in an endless cycle. But this was different. Humanity had stepped beyond the rules. They had become something no one could challenge, and that terrified them all. A new transmission came through, this time from a fleet positioned on the far edge of the battlefield. It was the Kelrathi Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the known universe. Their leader, Supreme Strategist Voss, appeared on the screen, his feline-like features twisted in unease. "Admiral Kalen," Voss said slowly, choosing his words with great care. "You have done what none of us believed possible. You destroyed the nightmare that plagued us all. But now you stand at a crossroads. You are no longer just another fleet in the galaxy. You are something else entirely." Kalen studied him, his expression unreadable. "Is that fear I hear in your voice, strategist?" The Kelrathi leader narrowed his eyes but did not deny it. "I would be a fool not to fear what I do not understand," Voss admitted. "You are powerful beyond measure now. But the question remains, what will you do with that power?" The bridge was silent. The crew, the officers, the entire fleet, they were waiting for an answer. Humanity had fought for survival, but now survival was guaranteed. The choice before them was one that had shaped civilizations for millennia. Would they remain guardians, protectors of those too weak to defend themselves? Or would they take the path so many before them had taken, ruling through strength, demanding submission rather than trust? Kalen's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. He had never wanted to be a conqueror. He had fought for his people, for their right to exist in a galaxy that had long dismissed them as insignificant. But now, with the power to unmake entire armadas with a single command, could he still claim to be the same man he was before? The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a crushing force. He exhaled slowly and finally spoke. "We did not ask for this power," he said. "But now that we have it, we will not turn our backs on the galaxy. We will not be tyrants. We will be something more." The words sent ripples through the Allied channels. Some were relieved. Others were skeptical. And a few, Kalen knew, were already planning how they could find a way to strike before humanity grew even stronger. But it did not matter. The course was set. Humanity had stepped beyond the boundaries of weakness and fear. They had faced the abyss and emerged stronger. The galaxy had underestimated them for the last time. And now, the future belonged to them.